BMW, the Bayerischer Motorenwerken or Bavarian Motorworks, has represented precision engineering and leading design in sporting sedans for over 40 years. However, the early years of the company go back a long way before BMW was known as a motor manufacturer. The origins of the company stretch back to 1913, when a Bavarian named Karl Rapp began an aeroplane engine factory in Munich named Rapp Motorenwerke. In 1917, Rapp resigned and the company recruited Franz Josef Popp from Daimler to become its managing director. The name changed to Bayerischer Motorenwerke, and the main product was the V12 aero engine. Their distinctive logo, representing a spinning propeller in the blue sky, has remained through the company's history. After the First World War, Max Friz, BMW's chief engineer, reluctantly looked to motorcycle and car engines to sustain the company's economic health after the collapse of the aircraft industry. Within 4 weeks of being commissioned, Friz had blueprints for what would become the famous Boxer engine. BMW motorcycles began appearing in 1919. The R32, which began production in 1923 with its horizontally opposed twin-cylinder 500cc engine and drive shaft in a double-tube frame, remained BMW's basic motorcycle technology for decades, and still is. Emilio Castiglione, a Viennese banker of Italian origin, was the financier who helped put BMW back on the right track, not once but twice. In 1928, with Popp and Friz, he bought the Fahrgewerke, or vehicle factory, in Eisenach and began building the Dixie, an Austin 7 built under license. BMW soon started modifying the design, raising the compression ratio and changing the type number to DA2. There was a tourer, a four-seater, a saloon, a van, and even a little sports car with a pointed rear end. BMW maintained their interest in the motorcycle world and continued to develop sales, but it was on four wheels that their plans for the future were based. In the early stages, even Mercedes agents were handling the cars, since there wasn't any direct competition from within the little BMW. From this little car of the early 30s, we can see the famous double-kidney grille of today's BMWs emerging. These 315 BMWs in America are some of the earliest cars seen outside Germany, originally imported into England in left-hand drive form. The little sports car is very similar to the cars which BMW entered in the Alpine Rally. From the start, BMW was interested in competition, and their cars were made in various body styles. Their link to Great Britain was through the Fraser-Nash Company. The 319 was the first 2-litre sports BMW and formed the basis of the 328, the car which really put BMW on the map. The progression to the 328 was as rapid as the car was. With its overhead valve engine, this formed the basis of BMW's competition work through the 30s. It was indeed a beautiful car. The engine went on to power the Bristol and Cooper Bristol racing cars as part of Germany's war reparation after the Second World War. Motorcycle ace Ernst Henner had made a name for himself on BMW's two-wheeled machines. He also made the debut of the 328 at the Eifelrennen in 1936 at the Nürburgring and took an easy victory. BMW were a confident company. Henner, together with other German drivers, ventured to Montlhéry near Paris for the Grand Prix of the Automobile Club of France. One car was driven by the combination of H.J. Aldington and AFP Fane from Britain, who were now very closely associated, distributing the cars in the UK, but primarily were known for their competition abilities. Fane was a very good driver. 459 328s were built in total, and about 150 of them survive today. Aside from the fact that the car was a 2-litre 6-cylinder, originally producing 80 brake horsepower, one of the most remarkable things about it was that BMW managed to use hemispherical combustion chambers without the use of an overhead camshaft. The intake valves were operated by push rods and rocker arms, the exhaust valves by a 90-degree set of rocker arms on the same shaft. It was an ingenious system. The early cars had the fuel tank under the bonnet, and there was no means of keeping the bonnet up when the car was being refueled during a race. Drama as the bonnet blows down 2 or 3 times while they're trying to refuel it. And notice that they cover the engine with a blanket to try and prevent the heat from the engine from igniting the fuel. Lessons were learnt, and eventually the fuel tank was put in the tail of the car. The trip to Montlhéry was not successful, and the next outing was to be the Tourist Trophy in Northern Ireland. Here, 3 cars were entered by Fraser-Nash BMW, but they were works cars. Aldington, Prince Bira of Thailand and Fane drove them. The Tourist Trophy more than made up for the disappointment that the team had had at Montlhéry. Notice that they had now found a way of stopping the bonnet falling on the mechanic's fingers, and the fuel tank is in the tail. Fane finished 3rd overall, and BMW won the team prize easily in a wet and dry race. It was a remarkable performance of reliability and speed from the German car, and the impressive Fane caught the eye of BMW. Afterwards, they entered him in a number of races as a works driver. Fane is seen here at the Eifelrennen and the Nürburgring in 1937 in car number 39. He was able to repeat the success of Ernst Henner, the former motorcyclist who won the race in 1936. The 328 was a success both commercially and on the racetrack, and BMW looked forward to the Le Mans 24-hour race in 1937. Le Mans, 1937. Fane was to share a works car with Aldington. A privately owned car was to be driven by South African Pat Fairfield, seen here with Fane before the race. Fairfield was to share with Murray. Unfortunately, this would not be a happy race for BMW. The cars line up at the start for the famous run across the road, with the BMWs and the Bugatti in the foreground. Early in the race, there was an accident at Whitehouse. Involved were Ross's BMW, Fane's BMW 328, some Della Hayes and a Riley, 5 cars in all. Fairfield lost his life as a result of his injuries. Eventually, the Fane and Aldington car retired, a sad end to a promising race. Donington Park and the 1937 Tourist Trophy. 4 BMW 328s were entered by the factory through Fraser-Nash BMW. They were driven by Aldington, Fane, Hector Dobbs and Prince Bira. In the early stages, Dobbs's car broke its rear axle. Bira, however, was extremely quick. BMW hadn't expected to take outright victory, giving away 1.5 litres to the 3.5-litre Talbots. A Morgan goes off the narrow track, and the Talbot of Comotti went on to win, with Bira in 3rd place. BMW returned to Donington Park for the 1938 Tourist Trophy. Again, they entered 4 works cars. Numbers 11 and 12 for Aldington and Fane, car number 14 for Bira, and car number 15 was entered for Mercedes-Benz Grand Prix driver Richard Seaman. This was Aldington's own car, upgraded to work specification for British races. The BMW was now developing 100 horsepower. The maximum speed was over 160 kilometers an hour, compared to the 150 of the standard car. This increase in power was offset by an increase in weight. They had to carry 80 kilograms of ballast. Fane sped off and left his teammates behind. He got up as high as 3rd place. Fane, an investor in BMW and Aldington's business partner, was something of a mystery man. He died during the Second World War, but was a fine driver who could have gone on to Grand Prix success. The weather was inclement at Donington Park. Close racing and Seaman right on the limit, correcting a spectacular slide. The French Delages led. Bira controls his car, but unfortunately, Aldington spins his. Fane got as high as third place until a gearbox problem sidelined the car. Seaman's progress was spectacular, catching the car again here. Dorothy Stanley Turner's MG, and then Seaman spinning off when the brakes began to fail. The winner, Louis Gerard with the Delage. In 1940, BMW built 3 cars for the Mille Miglia, run over a closed circuit. Huschke, von Hanstein and Walter Balmer were the winners of the race in the coupe. Aldington brought one of them back to Britain after the war, which became the prototype of the post-war Mille Miglia Frazer-Nash. The second of the 2 open-top cars found its way to America, the first one going back to BMW. But there was another development as well. Touring of Milan bodied these cars, very light indeed, with 120 brake horsepower engines for the 1941 Mille Miglia for the NSKK, the Nazi motorsport arm. Here is the original Mille Miglia car, which has found its way back to BMW via British journalist Michael Bowler. BMW had by now established themselves as a major car manufacturer alongside their aircraft and motorcycle divisions. These cars were the final development of the 328 by BMW. Further development was to take place after the war by Bristol in England. By 1941, BMW stopped making cars and concentrated on their aero efforts. The 335 with its 6-cylinder 3-litre engine was the victim of this policy. By the end of the war, the BMW works were either in the Russian zone of Germany or virtually destroyed. The Eisenach facility now produced Russian twin-cylinder motorcycles using pre-war BMW designs, marked with a red and white logo. In the dark days after the end of the war in 1945, BMW managed to stay in business doing repair work on Allied military vehicles and making bicycles, kitchen and garden equipment. BMW had debts of nearly 200 million marks when George Shaw Meyer persuaded them to go back into motorcycle manufacture. They introduced a new, inexpensive motorcycle to the German market in 1948, a 250 single, literally half a 500. With no interference from Munich, former BMW engineers Ernest Loof founded Veritas and Alex von Falkenhausen AFM, both in the BMW tradition. BMW fought back, first with a little lightweight motorcycle-engined car, the 600cc 513. It was only a design study, but it was the key to the cars which were to help BMW find its way back after the war. Molds for remanufacturing the 2-litre block were only available through their spares facility, but it was this engine that powered the original 501 to be followed by a new V8. Racing at the Nürburgring and a streamlined EMW, Veritas and the AFM of Huntsstuck Senior fight it out here with Cooper Bristols. The same engine, developed now to give so much more power that it was fighting it out with Maseratis for Formula 2 and Formula 1 honours in the 1950s. Meanwhile, the East Germans were marketing pre-war cars as BMWs, but Munich soon put a stop to that. Aldington had brought out the designs of the pre-war cars to share with Bristol, but when they fell out, Bristol went on alone, still producing the same 2-litre engine. The BMW-based Bristol engine was a mainstay of British racing during Formula 2 and Formula 1 of 1953 and 54. In the Cooper and ERA chassis, they fought alongside the Altair engine. The BMW was more durable. Mike Hawthorne used his Mark I Cooper Bristol as a springboard to Grand Prix racing. Even the ERA company, famous before the war for victories at the Nürburgring and Voiturette races, had adopted the Bristol engine to power their new G-Type. The chassis of this car was eventually turned into the Bristol sports racing car, which went on to win its class 3 years running at Le Mans. The 1952 British Grand Prix. Mike Hawthorn went on to finish third in this race and cemented the opportunity to go off and race with Ferrari the following year. The G-Type ERA no longer survives, and there is only one of the Bristol 450s. This is the open version, seen here at Goodwood with a cross-flow head that Bristol adapted to the car in its final development. But by now, BMW had put the 2-litre engine well behind them. This is the 503, built between 1956 and 59, powered by a V8 engine of 3.2 litres, developing 140 brake horsepower. The 507 was even more appealing. In open or coupe form, this car had a number of competition successes. People like Formula One and motorcycle world champion John Surtees were devoted to it and still have their cars to this day. At the other end of the scale was the little BMW Isetta. The motorcycles were profitable, and BMW's involvement in motorcycle racing, which had restarted just after the war, had enabled them to lead the field, particularly in the sidecar business. Their engines have powered many world champions to victory. On the car side, BMW's thinking was to go to the top of the market with their V8 engine while remaining active at the cheaper end with the little Isetta and also the 700 Coupe. But there was nothing in the middle, and this was a problem for BMW. Financially, they were still in trouble, unable to tool up for a new model, even though they'd made a prototype. The little Isetta was originally a 247cc, and eventually the engine was enlarged to almost 300cc, and it gave a maximum speed of 100 kilometers an hour. Although it was an immensely popular little car, particularly at the time of the oil supply crisis in 1956, the 700 proved to be even more so. In this car, BMW had the beginnings of their trailing arm rear suspension. Originally, the 700 Coupe gave a modest power output. However, the sport version gained some 40 brake horsepower. This little car was especially popular in competition. A maximum speed of 135 kilometers an hour in standard form saw this car pave the way for BMW's competition comeback. Here, the 700 is fighting it out with Saabs, DKWs and Minis at Zeltweg in Austria. By now, the 3-cylinder DKW 2-stroke and the similarly powered Saab were challenging water-cooled engines. Other manufacturers, such as BMC, were relying on the 4-cylinder water-cooled engines that had proved universally popular. But just as racing cars can crash out of races, so manufacturers can crash out of production, and it nearly happened to BMW. The Isetta and the 700 couldn't support them any more than the V8, the first to be built in Germany, could support them at the top of the scale. What they desperately needed was finance and to stop producing models that weren't selling. The solution was a recapitalization of the company by devaluing the existing stock by some 25% and selling the new stock to a privileged few. Herbert Quandt of the Quandt Cosmetics empire was the one who put up most of the money for the new shares, and the new R27 motorcycle, introduced in 1960, helped as well, as it became profitable. The 3200 Saloon and the 160 brake horsepower 3200 CS stayed in production until 1965. BMW's real effort was centered around one car, presented for the first time at the Frankfurt Motor Show in 1961, the new BMW 1500. This soon developed into a 1600 and an 1800 and eventually a full 2-litre. Tuned engines were offered in the 1800 Ti and the TII. Although the engine was producing the 80 to 83 brake horsepower that it did in 1500 or 1600 form, or 100 brake horsepower in its 2-litre shape, this was the car that the public was looking for. 4 doors and sports car performance from a saloon. The T-Lux version, for example, was capable of 200 kilometers an hour, and soon the car was in competition. BMW had previously shown that this was one way to promote a car, and so they did it all again. Hubert Hahner winning rallies and races all over Europe. Wins came thick and fast for BMW, and success with it. By the end of 1963, thanks to stubbornness and hard work, they'd resisted any takeovers and were returning a profit, able to pay a dividend of 6% to their shareholders. On the next Autofiles, BMW's success grows internationally as their racing program expands.